Okay, so welcome to Vibe, everyone. We're in Moiwo, we're on Lantau Island, and we're in Hong Kong. Vibe Book and Music Shop is where we are today for this production, and we're talking to Stefan Gannon. The talk will be, I don't know, around 30, 40 minutes. We're going out live on Facebook at the moment, globally, and so there are cameras here and here, which the people in the room need to avoid once we kick in. So Stefan's going to do the presentation and then a book read afterwards, and then we'll take questions after that. So without further ado, everyone, Stefan Gannon.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you all very much for attending. It's Saturday afternoon. It's good of you to spend your time here. This book is set in Victorian England. There's a reason for that. One, I thought that it would make it rather more interesting to set a story in a time that children and their parents know about in terms of history, but is not current, particularly when all of the stories are actually about issues that are current. It really demonstrates, I think, that a lot of the issues that we have been around for a very long time. There's nothing too much new under the sun, and it's a good way of explaining some of these issues away. Now, I'm a father of 4 kids. The dedication is to Samara, Kalina, Lyle, and Linnea. They are our 4 children, and these stories, or the earlier parts of the earlier stories of this group, came about during the SARS epidemic, because along with a lot of other kids, mine went back off to the UK to what was perceived to be a safer environment, and I stayed here to make the money. And they were very young, and we were actually apart for quite a long time. So I thought, well, how do I keep in touch with them? How do they hear my voice? And so I taped some stories, and some of them are here, and others are stories that have morphed into the book. The reason for the stories is that I often got asked questions by the children about things, how is it when you have a number of children in the family, you can love them all? Is love a finite thing, or can you extend love to the latest newcomer in the family? It's a question that a lot of children ask. How do you approach someone who has lost someone and is grieving? That's a subject we tend not to talk about a lot these days. We talk about many other subjects, but death and grieving and allowing people space to grieve is not something that I think most of us are particularly good at. So explaining that to children, I don't find it particularly easy, and I find it easier if it's in a story. So you will see that if you do read this book, that there are a number of short stories that deal with issues like this. The fact that joy can come from something very simple, doesn't have to be expensive. The fact that love is not a finite thing, but there's plenty of it to go around if you want to. That people who perhaps not so confident, there are reasons for that, and people can help them with that. And that there is bullying when you're a child, and there's bullying when you're an adult, and how do you deal with that? Those are the sort of issues. So actually, whilst the book is for children, funnily enough, I have found that a lot of adults, when they're reading it, get something from that. And it isn't, whilst it's a story for children set in Victorian times, this is not a sentimental book. I hope that it's not an unpleasant book or a frightening book, but it's not sentimental. It's set in a rural community, I know a bit about rural communities. My family have a farm. My extended family have a big farm. They've farmed for 300 years, and there's nothing easy about being a farmer and living in a rural community. And in the latter part of the 19th century, that was particularly true. So if you're looking for something that harks back to the golden days of rural England, this is not it. Okay, it's pretty realistic, but I hope that it's not frightening. So with that by way of introduction, I think what I might do is just read a little bit of the introduction so that I can tell you who the characters are, and then I will read one chapter that I've chosen. There are others, and I've probably made the wrong choice. I usually do. And we'll see how we go with that and see what you think of it. The main characters are Mr. and Mrs. Brown, Michael and Charlotte. Michael is a vet. Now, this is the 19th century, of course, end of the 19th century, when they didn't have all the equipment and the drugs and all the rest of it that they have. But he still did a pretty good job. Charlotte, his wife, is musically minded. She's quite a good musician. She was a governess. And they have two children, James and Emma, about 10 and 11, that sort of age group, when we start these stories. They live in the countryside in outside a village called Charfont. That's not too far from Winchester. For those who know England, that's in the county of Hampshire. It's on the southern coast. People have a very pleasant accent there, and it's a nice part of the world. But of course, at the time that this was being, these stories are taking place, it was a time of great change and actually some poverty in places. If you visited the Browns travelling from London, Birmingham or Manchester, you would, or anywhere else in the country that involved a long journey, you'd have done so on not a fast electric train, but a steam train, a locomotive that went clickety-clack, and the driver and fireman faces black, setting the night on fire as they roared past you. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack. When you get off the train in the local village of Charfont, you'd probably get into a pony and trap. You have the pony up the front, and the trap's an open type of carriage, and very pleasant on a pleasant day, pretty unpleasant when it's raining. But nevertheless, that was the mode of transport. You know when your journey in the trap is coming to an end, when the driver slows down the pony and gently pulls the reins to the left, taking you through two grey stone gateposts. Two black iron gates stand open for you, and you're carried up a long pathway that winds between beech and sycamore trees, with rough pasture suitable for cows and horses on either side. At the end of the drive, about 100 yards from the gates, it opens out onto a big area of gravel in front of the house. The journey is over when the driver asks you for a silver shilling, and perhaps you should have walked the 3 miles from the station in the first place. The house sits quietly in a sea of grass. Mr. and Mrs. Brown are what many people are pleased to call country folk, and that's a compliment. So they let the grass grow quite naturally up to the sides of the house. The only garden is the vegetable garden close by the kitchen door at the rear, full of herbs, potatoes, cabbage, beans and the like. All the same, the house is surrounded for much of the year by flowers. Crocuses, white and purple against the cold grey February skies. Daffodils in March tossed about but unbroken by the wind that is such a feature of that month. Bluebells under the trees in May, and a riot of colour in the summer months. The house has a flat front with large windows facing southwest to catch the best of a sunny day and a summer's evening. There are stone steps leading up from the gravel to the front door, which you will have guessed is green. Not a bright emerald green or a dull bottle green, but a dark, rich green, like that of an oak leaf or a Christmas tree. And in the middle of the door, a large, shiny brass knocker. It's a sturdy door, but certainly not over smart. Look carefully and you will see the dents made by folk who prefer to use the end of their walking sticks to knock rather than the knocker, which, truth to tell, is not used often. Look at the stone steps in front of the door, well worn and muddy from the comings and goings today. This is James and Emma's world. They each have a bedroom on the first floor of the house, and they have another room on the same floor which they use as their toy room, painting room, and music room. Lucky things. In that small space, they've rushed down a mighty river on a raft made of a cushion and 2 chairs. They've climbed onto the drawing table they're not supposed to stand on and conquered a mountain. In that room, they've fought with each other and made up, painted seashells and sketched their parents in crayon, curly hair and all. If you like colours, noise you can make but should not, the touch of a new toy, or better still, to cuddle a favourite teddy bear, rabbit, or other old friend, you'll understand all the things that go on here and can join in the fun. But Emma's and James' world is bigger than the toy room. It's a place of many people, all types, and of animals, big and not so big. It's a place of successes and failures, of tears, of sadness as well as joy. It's a world you do not live in, and yet it's one you know well. You can see it, and all the folk and animals in it if you close your eyes. The important thing is that it's a place for all of us to share. It's for those of us who have a song and the confidence to sing it, but it's equally for those who have a song but feel they can't. There's nothing special about James and Emma, because of course all children are extraordinary. However, they are amongst the lucky ones who've been given to understand that. They know what it is to be loved unconditionally. So come on, push open the green door and take their hands and sing your song. Chapter 10 of the book, the one I've chosen for this afternoon, is The Year of the Rabbit. It's almost certainly the wrong choice, but never mind, bear with me. It felt like the rain would never stop. For days now it had been falling. Michael Brown would leave every morning on his rounds wearing a big brimmed hat and the most waterproof coat he had. This was no weather for driving about the country in an open trap, but patients fell ill without thinking too much of the vet's convenience when they did so. It was the August before Uncle William's marriage to Lee May. If you read the book, you'll find out about that wedding. And it was the wettest August for a long time. James and Emma took this particularly badly, as of course it was the school holidays. Being cooped up indoors was not their idea of fun. They had had such plans for the holidays. Riding out on their ponies, picnics. Their mother was very fond of picnics. James was to improve his fishing lessons with Mr. Gurney, a retired gamekeeper, and Emma was to have swimming lessons in the stream that bordered their land. Lots of other things had been planned too. There was to have been an excursion to Winchester to visit the theatre, organised by the school mistress and mothers for all the children, but it was called off on account of the awful weather. I'm sure you know how rotten it is to be trapped indoors by the rain when there's so much to do outside. Of course, now there are a number of ways of passing the time happily. Television, films brought right into your home at the flick of a switch, computer games, etc. Can you imagine, what it would have been like for children like our two friends to face one rainy day after another without those things. Poor dears. So I take you back to a rain-soaked Friday during which the sun refused to come out from behind a dense bank of clouds all day. The day started in much the usual way. Mrs. Yates, the housekeeper, stoked up the kitchen range and served up porridge, freshly baked homemade jam and honey, glasses of milk for the children, a large pot of tea for their parents. Breakfast done, Mr. Brown wished them goodbye, and shortly afterwards they heard him splashing his way down the drive behind Blackie, the pony. For Mrs. Brown and the children, the next thing was to go to the stables. And I should say at this point that they were not dressed in their Sunday best, but in what old clothes were to hand. They all took turns helping out, as 2 horses and 3 ponies and the trap created a lot of work. So they splashed across the stable yard and into the stables, and an hour or so later, smelling more than a little of pony, the children came back in. All the animals were well, but just as bored as everyone else, with spending more time than usual in the stables. The cats were fed, and James went out to the woodshed to bring in some more fuel for the kitchen range. That done, the children were free until lunch, so upstairs they went to their toy room on the first floor just off the landing. As I've told you, they were particularly fortunate to have this room for their own, and it was their own. A small table and chair stood in the middle of the room, a bookcase with 3 shelves, all crammed with books, and another small table for Emma's doll's house, with the furniture provided, but the rest had been left up to them. Some of the toys piled in the corner were getting less and less use as the children grew. Only 1 or 2 were new. There was a miniature drum that James was very fond of banging, and there was Rabbit, Emma's oldest and most dearly beloved friend. When this Rabbit first met the little Emma, she soon stopped trying to use the T in his name, and from that time on he was called Rabbi. They were first brought together when she was only 2 years old, and he was an immediate hit. A handsome, cuddly rabbit he was, with big ears, big feet, and a beautiful light blue waistcoat. He had coal-black eyes, a light brown body, and a white chest. When Emma first met Rabbi, he was at least half her size. As she grew, he unaccountably seemed to get smaller. But he still had the smile on his face and the white paws Emma had been fascinated by. From the first, they had been constant companions. Whenever Emma could not find him, the cry went up, "Where's Rabbi? Where's Rabbi?" And everything going on in the house stopped while a thorough search was made. You know, for a stuffed toy, Rabbi had the most extraordinary ability to travel and hide himself in the strangest of places. Emma, it was true, was a bit forgetful, but Charlotte did suspect that sometimes Rabbi had a bit of his close friend's help, hiding in odd places, for the pleasure it gave Emma watching the family search every nook and cranny of the house. This was never proved, of course. Rabbi would not tell. In all the ups and downs of Emma's life, Rabbi was there to comfort and counsel her, to romp in the toy room with her, to sit attentively at her side at dinner, listening to the conversation. She laughed with him and cried with him, and sometimes she would pull a consoling paw to her face, and on more happy occasions he would politely suffer the indignity of being repeatedly thrown in the air and caught. Emma did have one habit that I think Rabbi had every right to complain about, had he been the complaining sort. It was not uncommon for Emma to carry him about by one or other of his ears. Initially, Rabbi had a very fine pair of ears, very becoming they were, but Having been used like the handles on a briefcase for so many years, they looked more than a bit floppy and knocked about. In fact, Rabbie showed wear and tear of his very full life with Emma in a number of places. In spite of the efforts of everyone at home who could use a needle and thread, he had a couple of threadbare patches where the going had been toughest. From time to time, the smile on his face got a bit lopsided, but running repairs and his natural good humour soon had it back in its place. The new toys and some lovely some new toys and lovely dolls, which Emma was very fond of dressing, came into the toy room, but only Rabbie slept on her pillow. And so it was that this rainy August, Rabbie found himself again in the familiar toy room, having been carried unprotestingly up the stairs from the kitchen by his left ear and seated on the table next to the doll's house. But not all was well today. Apart from the rain, something was troubling Emma. James, who was searching for the box of crayons, distinctly heard her say, "I must stop this. Getting too old. Must stop." She was saying this as she started to dress one of her dolls. She put it down on the table next to Rabbie, sat down and opened her favourite colouring book. The doll and Rabbie were left alone. The rain persisted for another day or two, but finally the sun came out. Ponies and horses were turned out to run in the fields behind the house, and Mother organised one of her picnics. Her picnics were always fun. Lemonade, sandwiches, some scones, and a brightly coloured checkered tablecloth was all that was needed, all packed up in a huge wicker basket, and they were off. A good stretch of the legs took them to the stream Emma had been wanting to swim in. The whole family sat down under a huge oak tree, laid out the mugs and the plates, then tucked in. They had a glorious afternoon of it. The sun shone down and a cool breeze came wafting along to provide them, after so much cloud and rain, with the perfect, elusive English summer's afternoon. About 5 o'clock, Charlotte Brown gave them all their marching orders. Time to go home. As go home meant dinner and feeding the ponies, the children were on their feet immediately. Just as they were about to set off, Charlotte noticed for the first time that Emma did not have Rabbie in her hand. Nothing surprising there. "Where's Rabbie?" laughed Charlotte. "Send out the search parties." "Oh, it's all right, Mummy," said Emma. "He is safe and sound in the toy room." Mr. Brown started to exclaim before a very serious look from and a finger to the lips of his wife stopped him. "Oh, well, of course it's all right then," he corrected himself. Any parent will tell you it is hard to see their children grow up. I don't expect you to understand that now, but you probably will. Now, Charlotte had noticed for some time that Emma was moving on from playing with the toys she had done, and rightly had done, when she was younger. She was more engaged now with sketching, the ponies, things which could be described as more grown up. Naturally, that meant leaving some old interests behind. But I think you'll find in life that as one door closes, another opens. Well, at least that's been my experience and Emma's. It's also true that some things do not change, and some loyalties can never be broken. When they got back to the house, Mr. Brown took Charlotte to one side. "Is Emma all right?" he asked. "But of course, dear. She's 11 and a very grown-up young lady. In many ways, you've seen to that by letting her see you work with the animals. And we've never spoken to her like a child, if you think about it. It's very natural that she should be putting toys suitable for young children to one side. Don't worry, all will be well. Well, of course, Mr. Brown knew this to be true. But Rabbi was to his mind something different. Good heavens, he got so used to the bunny being around, he treated it as half human himself. Of course, he'd not admitted that to anyone. He felt a real sense of loss to think that Rabbi's part in Emma's life was coming to a close. That evening, he went into Emma's room with Charlotte to give her his usual goodnight kiss, and he felt a jolt in his stomach as for the first time Rabbi was nowhere to be seen. They went into James's room, and there was Checkers. James's small, pillow-shaped, like a Scotty dog, and made of a blue and white checkered cloth and cotton inner filling. James was already asleep. Michael and Charlotte looked silently at the two lying sleeping together, James' arm tucked securely around Checkers' middle. It was a thoughtful couple that sat by the fire that night. Mr. Brown could not help wondering when Checkers would be the next one to be left aside. The conversation was of the speed at which time flies by. Time indeed waits for no man, no woman, no mum, no dad, no child. Every day from then on, Mr. Brown and Charlotte would find time to go into the toy room, and there was Rabbi, unmoving, sitting by the doll's house. No more murmured conversations between him and Emma. No secret chuckles. Nothing. The good weather lasted. The children spent much of their time outdoors. On the Friday, the vicar, Mr. Collins, and his wife dropped by. They told the Browns that now the weather had cleared up, a number of the parents with children at the village school were putting together a party for the children to make up for the abandoned theatre trip. They had managed to get a travelling Punch and Judy man to put on a show. And if you don't know what a Punch and Judy show is, still is, after all this time, ask your parents. Michael and Charlotte expected that the children would be pleased to hear this news. James seemed all right about it, but Emma went very quiet. Realising something was wrong, Mrs. Brown invited her into the kitchen to help her prepare and bake some scones. Slowly, after much other conversation, Charlotte asked Emma if she was not happy about going to join the other children at the party. Great silent tears welled up in Emma's eyes. With a little more persuasion, she told her mother that almost at the end of the school term, some weeks ago, there had been a fight between James and one of the other boys. This was the first Charlotte had heard of this. Apparently, a small group of both boys and girls, only a few, had taken to teasing Emma about Rabbi. Up until then, Emma had never thought there was anything to hide about him, and when it came to her turn in a sort of show and tell lesson, in which she got to speak of something of real interest to her, she'd chosen Rabbi. It was all very simple stuff. When she got him, who gave him to her, and the fact that he was a companion. That's all. Nothing silly. But there are some folk, often not too strong, who take pleasure in making other, perhaps more open and secure people, feel small. And this little group turned on Emma, confused her, called her names, and made her cry. The ringleader of this little group, whose name Emma would not give, right in the middle of his teasing, was hit by a whirlwind as James pitched in. James apparently had come off worse in the fight, but better in the eyes of the school children watching than his opponent, who was more than 2 years older than him. After that, of course, Emma, who was growing out of dolls, had felt it was time to grow out of Rabbie. Charlotte, and after he heard of this, Mr. Brown were of course angry at what had occurred. But on balance, they felt it best to leave the whole question of the fight alone because there was more important work to do. That evening, when everyone felt calmer, Charlotte took Emma by the hand up to her bedroom. Now, this was a very comfortable bedroom, cheerful colours. The evening sun streamed in through the windows. Charlotte went to a table next to the bed, opened the drawer, and took out a small cotton pillow in a rather worn pillowcase with frayed lace edges. Charlotte quite unconsciously put the pillow briefly to her cheek and then to Emma's. Emma had, of course, met Pillow before. Sometimes, however, a nasty incident, a little confusion, can make us forget things, make us lose our sense of proportion. And for a brief while, Emma had forgotten Pillow. Pillow, as she did not need to be reminded, was her mother's Rabbie. She had had that little friend for over 30 years. Pillow was someone Charlotte had never quite been able to leave behind. Pillow had come with her to school in her school bag. He shared her bedroom when she worked alone in other people's houses as a governess. And Pillow was waiting for her in the bedroom the day she was married. She had laughed and cried into Pillow, cuddled up to him, and thrown him in the air and caught him the day she discovered she was pregnant. Well, there was a serious and short conversation about pillows and rabbies, and also about bullies and what shadow, frightened people they usually are. That night, to the intense relief of Mr. Brown, Emma could be heard talking to Rabbie as he snuggled up to her in bed. The following day, Mr. Brown and his wife took the children to the party in the village. Both of the children wore satchels on their back, usually used for school books, but now for sandwiches. And Rabbie, his head and ears sticking out of Emma's satchel, for all to see, went to the party. Now, I've heard it said that it's an old belief in China that if you wear a piece of jade long enough, it becomes a part of you. Something of you is transferred to it and makes its home there. It seems that it used to be the case that if a Chinese friend gave you a piece of jade that they had worn for some time, it signified that they were giving you a little of themselves. I hope that is so, and that such a pleasant tradition continues. I wonder whether it's similar with such much-loved friends as the Rabbies, Checkers and Pillows of this world, and I like to think so. In their silent companionship, they take in so much of a person's changing life without flinching. They're a rock. They are uncritical. You can speak to them when it's difficult to talk to others. And in their own way, they talk back. Did Emma, as she became an adult, finally abandon Rabbie? Of course not. Her children visited him with their children. Checkers was never in danger. You might doubt me when I say these special friends stay with many of us to remind us of how we were and how we have come to be what we are. They are there to take us back to the happy days of our childhood and the difficult ones too. A glance at them or their touch can be very comforting, even to the strongest, most sophisticated person. Well, I may be wrong. I usually am. What do you think?
Excellent. Is my mic on, Phil? Sorry. Excellent. Really vivid story there. And so, Stefan and I met through a mutual friend a few years ago. And Stefan had just written this book and was thinking about putting it onto audiobooks. And so over a series of recordings, I think a chapter a week or something, a few months, and we recorded it with Stefan basically doing the narration for it, and we published it on Amazon Audible and Barnes and Noble and 50 odd other audiobook sites. And then fast forward sort of to today, and I think over the last months, Stefan has just brought out this book, this paperback version of the book, and so that brings us to here today. So the book is available on audiobooks and it is available in store. So what we're going to do now is just see if anybody's got any questions. So put your hand up if you've got a question, and I'll come over to you.
And I'll do my best to answer.
Yeah. Jane, have you got a question?
Would it be good for as a middle grade novel for kids to read themselves, at school or something like that?
That's a useful question. Thank you. One of the difficulties I had in the past was wondering who should read this. I have been asked, what's the target audience? And I can't honestly give a very clear answer to that, but I think that it is that group in particular that can get something out of it. Those people I know who have children in that age group who have been reading the book tell me that it works because they're old enough to understand the serious points that are being made. One of the chapters, for instance, is about a young woman who's become a tramp and through no fault of her own, and she's down, but doesn't mean she's out. Children of that age group, or young people of that age group, are in quite a good position to focus on that and to see the message that's there. Very young children, perhaps not, although some of the stories, yes, but the middle grade kids, I think, is a definite audience. Those who are growing up in a world that's full of complexities for them. It's a time when you're learning a lot about life and maybe quite open to something like this. Yeah, I would say that's a target group. Although, funnily enough, some of the people who've been most interested in it have been almost as old as I am, actually. But that would be the group of youngsters I would be particularly keen to see read this.
Probably identify with a lot of the things that are going on
In their lives, yes, indeed. A loss of a grandparent, for example. How do you cope with that?
Just thinking about this one, just about the bullying a little bit and
yes.
Transition to becoming a bit bullying.
Yeah, and having the confidence to hang on to things from your childhood that are good and that stay with us. Here's Mr. Bear. He's done time with me in quarantine. You hang on. You let some things go, in terms of your childhood. Other things you stick with, and that's all right. And don't let people make fun of you because you hang on to those things. They're valuable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, no, right, but that was the thing I always found most difficult when I was asked, actually. What's the target group? I don't know.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Okay, one from me about sorry, so the question from me is the book is self-published.
Yeah.
And you know, can you tell us a little bit about how you went through that process, and why did you go through that process?
Well, I don't know what on earth it was that actually motivated me to actually write this. It was just something I wanted to write, and it was for myself, but it was also for the children, because some of what is in here is effectively ways in which I try to answer some of their questions, and I thought it'd be quite nice to record that just simply for the family, you know, apart from anything else. It became very clear to me and others who read this with a view to publishing that this wasn't Jerry the giraffe, you know. The review that I had from South China Morning Post, which was a nice review, I'm very, very, very pleased with that, did make the point that the language is rather sophisticated for a young audience. Well, actually, I don't accept that at all. I don't believe in dumbing down with kids. My father read me Wind in the Willows, and that's a lyrical piece of work, and when I was very young, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I realised, though, that, you know, not being Jerry the giraffe, and, you know, maybe being a bit apparently on the highbrow for some people, you know, you're not going to get it published and put out by people who do this stuff for children. And I thought, well, I can't be bothered anyway, to be honest with you, you know, so self-publish. And so I had to ask around, because I hadn't got I'm a lawyer, you know, so I don't have a clue about, you know, publishing and all the rest of it. So it's a very good friend of mine, Patrick Dransfield, who's just been mentioned. And he put me in touch with the right people. I mean, frankly, what you need is, if you want illustrations, is a great illustrator like Chloe Frang. What you want is someone who can set out the book in an appropriate way. Noel de Guzman's helped me with that, and I found out about him. And then you go to any one of a number of printers. They're all around. The first edition of this was a hardback, which has been sold. It didn't have any illustrations, and that was probably a mistake. So you make mistakes when you start self-publishing because you don't necessarily get the right advice. This is probably easier for people to cope with than a hardback with no illustrations, you know. And essentially that's it. The cost is a very important factor. How do you cost it? Well, if you have a hardback with proper binding and all the rest of it, that's going to be a lot more expensive than a computerized version like this. But if it's coloured, if you have coloured illustrations, it's more expensive than black and white. But actually, it's not too difficult once you've got your illustrator, once you've got someone who knows how to format these things. And I'm hopeless with technology, you know. So he and Chloe have done all the work getting the illustrations into this. And, I've also had that the author plays the important part of checking that the illustrations are in the right place for the text. That's something you really have to watch as the author. But the production, you just go to the right people and pay them, and that's it. As I say, I knew nothing at all about self-publishing. It's been a great experience, actually. I would really recommend it because you learn so much about an industry that you've taken so for granted. You know, everything looks so easy when you go into a bookshop. It isn't quite that easy when you're doing it for yourself, you know. But that's the basics, I think. Anyone who wanted to do it, you know, it's not that difficult to do. You've got to have the text. I mean, the biggest time factor, the thing that takes the most time for me is actually the proofreading. If you've got a good I did my own proofreading. If you've got a good proofreader, that wouldn't be a bad idea, because I can tell you I read through this proof quite a number of times, and kept on missing things, you know, and it's taken me a very long time to get a clean version. So, good proofreader, if you can find one, is a valuable item.
I have another question. You know, we have a number of self-published books here and a number of self-published vinyl, actually. And often what people find is that there's a minimum number that they have, and they end up with, you know, a house full of boxes and 400 copies of a book. How did you get round that problem?
No, I've got round it with the second edition. Yes, first edition I ordered too many, because the thing is that it gets cheaper the more copies you have done. Okay, also if you go as I did to booksellers who do have a large number of customers, and we did sell quite a few of these books, relatively speaking. There is tendency, if you're not experienced, and I wasn't, to order too many. So I have several boxes of the originals sitting in the storage facilities, costing me money. And you know, maybe when I'm dead and famous, you know, someone will want them, but I suspect not. If you go for a more limited print, and I did with this on this occasion, you can always have more done, you know, it's okay. But the price of each individual copy goes up, and that's the only issue, really. They'll do as many as you want and as few as you want, but they will charge accordingly, because obviously, you know, if they're spending time doing this and you want 50 copies or you want 100 copies, that's not the same thing as 2,000. And the cost reflects that.
Just one last question from me. Anything to say on the legal aspects of the book and making sure copyright is in place?
I mean, it's again, it's quite standard actually, but don't in any way underestimate the value of this. First of all, every book has to have a ISBN number. Okay. So actually, that's so that people can get a hold of it. You know, if they're going to a library or they're ordering it, it's a big help to do that. So it's a sales factor, but it also helps identify your book as it identifies a particular book, and you make sure that you stick in the usual blurb about this being yours, the copyright remains yours, and all the rest of it, the intellectual property in it remains yours. Actually, in law, as I understand it, I'm not a copyright lawyer. That is the case anyway, but there's no harm in telling the world that is in fact the case, because you know as well as I do that people plagiarize frequently these days. But that's about it. There's also a requirement in Hong Kong that you place, I think it's 2 copies with the public libraries. So that they have a copy of that, and it's available. And I think basically those are the legal aspects of it that I had to take into account. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to finish with a shameless plug for me and my site. So. On YouTube, we have a site called Live at Vibe HK. I have a little mini-series that I'm running on there called Tales of Jack and Millie. And when I met Stefan and Stefan started narrating the book, I realised what a wonderful voice he has. And so I asked Stefan, would you do some narration for me on that series? And so, Stefan, we're into our second series now online and Live at Vibe HK. That's all self-published as well and made, and you know, we're about to go live with the second series recordings in the coming months. Okay, so just remains for me to say thank you very much, Stefan Gannon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.